Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that won't have you tossing and turning at night, wondering how you're going to pay for your other bills. I am Mark Stucker.
And I am Anika Madden. It is Thursday, October 4th, and welcome to episode number 36, How High School Courses Are Evaluated by Selective Colleges. In this week's news, peril, as in danger, for small private colleges, and we'll be in chapter 36 of 171 answers, and Mark and I will be talking about how selective colleges evaluate high school courses. And this week's question is from a mom who wants to know if her daughter moves in with relatives in California, would she be able to get in-state tuition so she can go to UCLA and pay the in-state tuition rate? This week, Mark interviews Jake Neuberg. He's the co-founder of Revolution Prep, and they'll be talking about the advantages of taking online test prep.
Friends, October is here. And for the singers who are listening or for your parents, I want to stress two very important things. First of all, emails, and secondly, deadlines. Check your email every day, actually twice a day, for important emails from the colleges. Check your spam email and make sure you know the deadlines every year. At least one, and Anika, and usually two or three of my students miss out on a great opportunity because they miss an email. Anything else you want to add to that?
Well, you know, the FAFSA opened up on October 1st. So you had that excellent interview with Mike Runowitz. And so I'm hopeful, but I'm positive that our listeners have tuned in to part 1 and part 2 on that. So just listen up.
And you know one thing, Anika, there's some schools that give you like $500 to $1,000 for getting the FAFSA in really, really fast. So even that you're not at the deadlines
really?
yet. Yeah. Oh. So you might be in for next to $500 to $1,000 just for getting that thing in quickly.
Ooh, there it is.
That bad boy.
Get it in there, folks.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, this week's article is found in Inside Higher Ed, and this is by Mr. Doug Lederman, and it's entitled Peril for Small Private Colleges. And so, Mark, what this is about is that these small private institutions are in danger, essentially in danger of, well, I'm going to let you reframe that, but I'm just going to go into the summary of this. So what is happening is that they are reevaluating, or they are evaluating the fact that they may or may not be financially stable over the next 10 years. And so, Mark, what I want to quickly get to you about is, before we dive into this whole article, because I'm so anxious about these parents and these current families who are in these smaller private institutions and the ones that'll be listening to this like, oh my God, like what is happening right now. But what they're saying, Mark, or what he is saying, Mark, is that schools are coming to a realization that they are having these serious discussions that they may have to merge with other institutions, which I don't technically guess that's a bad thing. And I'll let you dive into that as well. But one specific question I have for you, that one thing that's pointed out in this article, Mark, is that it says that these financial institutions, 4-year private colleges now acknowledge the fact that their tuition discount rate is unsustainable. Mm-hmm. So start where you want. But okay. I remember you talking about the tuition discount rate, and I know that's a translation for something else. Mm-hmm. But go ahead and take that away, Mark. Help us out.
All right. So Inside Higher Ed partners up with Gallup every year to do this, study. And, Gallup doesn't play around. So, it's scientific, accurate study. And they do it every year. They do the study mostly of chief business officers at colleges as well as presidents, just to kind of take the temperature to see what's going on. And so, it's been a trend that's been going on for a while where schools have been expressing real angst, real trepidation about the financial trends. For example, some of the things that came out of the study, you mentioned this, Anika, but last year's study, only 5% of colleges said they were considering a merger. And this year, 24% said they were considering a merger. So that was up 500%. And 26% said they thought that they should be looking at merging. So you mentioned that, well, merging is not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're merging for survival because you don't think you'll be able to stay afloat unless you merge, it was just kind of cause for concern. And as you mentioned, 68% said their tuition discount rate was not sustainable. And one more statistic for you stat people like me, I'm a stat geek, from the article. I am. It is what it is. 44% of the chief financial officers at 4-year baccalaureate colleges said they are confident their college will be financially stable over the next 10 years. So that is actually down from the number the year before that thought that 52% thought it would be sustainable and 54% the year before that. So the trends aren't good. Now, one thing I would say, Nick, it's not all small colleges, okay? It tends to be a certain type of small college. And I would define the small college as this. It's the small college that does not have a large endowment. So private colleges rely on endowments, right? Which are like their nest egg fund that they draw approximately 5% off every year, and it goes into the operating budget to give you money so you're not totally dependent on tuition. In case you have a bad enrollment year, if you're dependent on tuition, you're kind of sunk. But if you've got enrollment, it's like a family that's got $1 million in the bank compared to another family that has living check to check, right? So it's a big difference. So it's schools that have private schools that have low endowments and that have poor national brand names. So their name, their reputation, the prestige of the school makes it difficult for them to attract students. So that's the first thing. Now, as far as tuition discount rate is, you want to take a guess what that means? Any idea?
I know we've talked about this before, Mark, but no, I don't, because I'm drawing a blank.
Well, to be honest, I don't think we've ever really defined it. I might have said it before, but I don't really remember defining it. So I'm going to explain it by way of illustration, and I'll also talk about what's going on. So in the same way that Amazon is putting out all kinds of strip malls and retail stores across the country, most people are sort of familiar with that. So that's kind of the deal. So let's say you are a retail store and you're trying to sell a coat for $99, $100, but nobody's paying the $99 because they're like, hey, I can go on Amazon and get it cheaper. So then you drop it to $80 and it doesn't sell. $60, it doesn't sell. Finally, you got to sell the coat, the $100 coat for $50. So that would be a 50% discount rate. And so the discount rate is the percentage of the sticker price, the price that's listed as the full price, that you're actually receiving in revenue from students. So in other words, if you list your school at, if you list your tuition at $50,000, right? But you're really getting $20,000, then that would be a 60% discount rate. And the reason why you have to lower that is because there's so much pressure from many other things going on. You've got pressure from competition, from other colleges, new hybrid models that are out there, online colleges, badges, decreased students coming from international countries, less graduating students, and more students who are graduating that are coming from low-income families. And so when that's the population that you're attracting, in order to fulfill your enrollment objectives, you keep having to lower and lower and lower your price. Now, when I say lower and lower your price, basically that means you have to keep giving people more money in the way of grants and scholarships in order to get them to come. So does that make sense?
Okay. It does.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you,
the
Mark.
tuition discount rate is just the percentage off of full price that people actually pay. All right. That's what it is.
Okay.
Now, it's one thing, like wealthier schools, they take pride in having substantial financial aid. Like that's part of their pride. Like you're going to be around students from all walks of life, and that's the real world, and you're going to broaden your perspective because you're going to be around that. But less wealthy schools, they're not doing that for that. They're just doing that because that's the only way they can get kids to come. And so the other thing that's been happening, and again, we have talked about this once or twice, is liberal arts schools are under attack because people are like, are you really going to get a job there? And what's in vogue is more professional tracks like engineering and computer science and architecture and nursing, where people can see that this specific skill leads to this specific job as opposed to a broad-based form of training. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And so in the reality, and we had the financial crash in 2008, and schools haven't really fully still recovered from that crash. So they haven't. Now, it's not only private small schools in this study, it's across the board, but that's where the pain is being felt the most.
Right. So, Mark, my next highlight out of all of this is the part in this article where they talk about how transparent these institutions are with their constituents. So here I am, I'm a parent, I'm listening to Mark and Anika. I'm at this private institution. It's small, that doesn't have a big endowment, and my darn ears just flew up, and my little tentacles flew up because I'm like, oh my God, what are they talking about? And I can be this. Like, this could be my school. So it goes in and it cites about how many of these schools say that their alumni are very aware, their faculty and staff members are very aware, or just how many people they're making know, or they're letting know that this is an issue, like this is a thing that's going on at their school. So can you talk to us about how that typically works in these crises? How transparent are these institutions with with their key constituents? Most importantly, and of course, in our frame, in our regard, it's going to be our parents and families that are there. So how often are these parents and families informed when these types of things are happening? Like, what is that trend like? Or should we just know that they're never going to tell us, and we just need to take it upon ourselves to go find out if we're one of these people that you're talking about?
What's really cool, Anika? This is episode 36, and I feel like I really get in sync with you, because as I was preparing for this, I said, you know what? Anika's going to ask this question. She's going to say, "What's the big takeaway? What give me the
big takeaway?
What's the so what for our families?" I knew it. I knew it. So guess what? I was ready for you this time.
Well, let's go.
So one thing that I would say is that if we're talking about prospective families or even current families, don't necessarily expect to get big announcements from the school, because they don't want to press the panic button, because that is not the best way to recruit students, right? It's not the best way. It's not. And no, it's not even the best way to keep your current students. So don't expect, announcements from the school unless now you might see signs from the school, but for example, let's say you find out that they are dropping departments or dropping majors and things like that. Those are often telltale indications, or faculty or widespread faculty layoffs, and those are when you see those things, you're going to inquire about them. But some of the other things that you can do, certainly you should be aware of the endowment and what the endowment is for private schools. That is very important. And you can use a website called Nakubo and look at that. It has fantastic information on endowment. See how your school stacks up to others. That is going to be a factor, because then you're going to be very, very tuition driven with low endowment. Another thing, and you're going to be suspect to, if wealthy schools catch a cold, you're going to have pneumonia. So another thing, no, it's true. I mean, it's true. Be all up in the hospital 3 months, Wow. Another thing that you can look at is the enrollment numbers. So that stuff is published. Look at the enrollment numbers. Are they trending upward or downward? Because that's still tuition revenue still drives the budget at the overwhelming majority of schools. So take a look at enrollment numbers. All this is published, by the way. Multiple websites can give you that. You can look up the financial statements. They are available, and compare the incoming revenues from the previous year to the current year, and look at trends. You could also call a chief business officer or even sometimes financial aid directors and be prepared to ask them the tough questions. And those are all things you can do. And the other thing I would say is, if you're a full pay family and you do not need any financial aid, realize that most schools, this is a big hook, and you actually have leverage, because the college needs your money, and they do certain things because they need your money, including easier to get in, and sometimes even giving you scholarships, not because you're an outstanding kid, but because they're trying to entice and seduce you to enroll, because they need the $50,000 that you can pay, because the other person that you're competing with maybe can only pay 10 or 20. So what are your thoughts on those things?
I think it's great. And I think I'm thankful for you making us aware. And one thing I want to be clear on before it escapes my brain was that Nakubo? Was that with a K or a C? Nakubo, N-A-C?
Yeah, so it's a C.
Okay.
You know what? Let's put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Let's put it in the show notes.
Bam, there it is.
We'll put it in the show notes.
All right.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
There it is, folks.
Oh, there is one more thing.
Okay.
That I'm sure any college that's listening to me would be like, Mark, why didn't you tell him one more thing? Write us a big check.
For those big check writing people that are listening. Not me. Not me. Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Friends, we are in episode 36, which means that we are looking at chapter 36 of a book I wrote. It's a 691-page reference book called 171 Answers, where we take one chapter for each of the most asked questions I'm asked as a college coach. And so the question today we're looking at, which is in chapter 36 of the book, is how will selective colleges evaluate the courses I have taken? So we're just going to hit on a couple of highlights from the book and have a robust discussion. So what were your takeaways from this chapter, Anika?
Yeah, so the biggest takeaway, well, let me say the first takeaway is that the colleges are looking at our intended majors, and they're looking at the type of rigor we took that would frame how well we would do in that major. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So for example, if I want to be an engineer, how well did I do in my math and science course, I guess. I'm gonna tell you one thing that threw me though, Mark, was your story. And I know you talked about Karis and how, she didn't fare so well in terms of her academic courses in certain areas, but she was able to impress in other areas. So I don't want to go too, put the cart before the horse, but I do want to, that was my biggest throw in all of this, is because, wow, there's still opportunity for, they're still flexing in all of this. These are there's systems that they have in place, but it just knowing that there's always these opportunities where they can, or exceptions. And I don't want to say that's the common thing that happens, but the fact that it does happen was pretty striking to me, but I'll let you take it from there.
All right, so let me make a few comments. The first thing, every time we talk about this, I do feel the need to have a caveat. And the caveat is I don't want people overly stressing themselves out, feeling like they need to take every single advanced class. We've talked about this in quite a few podcasts, Anika, how we believe in balanced excellence, and your academic component of your life, while it's important, you have other aspects of your life that are also important. And there's always somebody that hears what we're going to say and says, oh, I need to take every advanced class. That is not what we are saying. You want to take the advanced classes that you can excel in while maintaining balanced excellence in your life. So let's just get that out there. But every year, NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, they do an annual survey with the college admission offices to find out what are the most important factors that they use to determine who they admit. And every year, without exception, the number one answer is high grades in rigorous classes, especially for selective schools. That is the number one thing that selective schools look for, is high grades in rigorous classes. So the first thing that I would say is that colleges are going to judge you in the context of what your school had to offer. So I have a friend that got into MIT with only taking 3 AP classes, and people are surprised when they hear that. Well, that's because her school offered only 4 of them. So they looked at her in that context. If she would have come from a school that had 10 or 12, then 3 would not have been acceptable. I could bet the house on that. So they'll look at you through the context of your offering. So if the school I was at, we dropped AP, so nobody was held. That was never held against anybody, right? We had advanced classes that were creative and were different. Some schools have IB, some have AP, some have dual enrollment. They're going to evaluate you in light of what your school had to offer. Now, I do believe that increasingly the most selective schools are expecting kids that don't have much in the way of advanced classes to take advantage of some of the online classes that are out there nowadays, now that they're so prevalent. But that's still important. You get judged in the context of what you had to offer. So that's important. Second thing that I would say is that your evaluation is going to be primarily focused on your core classes. Anika, what are the 5 core classes?
English, math, science, history.
Yes.
You
always get 4 every time I ask you. You always go 4 for 5.
Oh my gosh. And I'm here again today. Darn it. What's the 5th one?
Foreign language.
There it is.
Yeah. So the primary evaluation is going to be math, science, English, history, foreign language. Not going to be focusing so much on the theater class, visual arts class, that kind of thing, unless that's what you're majoring in. Third thing, the most advanced curriculum, is expected from students across multiple core classes. So the story you talked about with Kara, she actually had taken advanced classes in 3 of those 5 cores, and she did get to calculus. She didn't do AP calculus, but she got to calculus. So she did everything except advanced science. So when she was looking at Davidson College, I reached out to a couple of people I knew at Davidson. I asked them to evaluate her curriculum, and they're like, this looks pretty good, but you might want to beef up your science. But I happen to know, and she knows that she didn't like science, and she didn't necessarily think she would ace science. So fortunately, she did well enough in those other 4 of those 5 that she was able to be admitted. But so you're going to be they're going to expect you to take advanced classes in multiple courses in those 5 areas. All right. Next, I would say this. This is the point you brought up. Your curriculum will be seen through the prism of your declared major. And, you know, as a student I was working with last year, and I was actually co-counseling because it was a boarding school student. So I worked in conjunction with the school counselor there. And she was looking at being a pre-med major, but she wasn't doing that well in the sciences. And she was correctly advised that you may not want to put pre-med as a major because there's going to be tremendous scrutiny to her math and her science courses, right? Versus if she would have declared herself to be a creative writing major or to say even undecided. So that's something to think about. And then the last thing that I would say is that when it comes to selective liberal arts colleges, they don't tend to differentiate as much depending on what your major is. They're going to expect you to be strong in math and science and English and history and foreign language. So the question for you is, Nika, why would maybe a national university cut you a little more slack in an area than a selective liberal arts college? What do you think? It's a hard question.
Yeah,
so
don't know.
Don't feel bad if you don't know.
Let me quickly tell you. I have no idea.
You know what? I just like how honest you are. I love it. So the reason for that is because with liberal arts colleges, your major tends not to matter as much because you're not training for a specific profession. So what liberal arts schools do is they are interdisciplinary, right? So they want you to combine science with philosophy, with English, with history, with sociology, and that's how they develop critical thinkers. So they do require, they expect strong performance across all core areas, the most selective liberal arts colleges. And I'm talking about the Pomonas, the Amherst, the Swarthmores, the Davidsons, the Haverfords, the Bowdens, the Middleburys, and I could go on and on, the Welsleys and, other schools like that, Claremont McKenna. I mean, there's many more I could mention. Those schools, they expect, excellence across all areas because they're training minds and you can't sort of hide out away from your areas that you aren't as strong in. So what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking about another part of your chapter when you talked about your colleague that would evaluate these, be in a situation where she would be evaluating these kids who want to get into these schools. And it was so unfortunate that she couldn't help them because it was too late. So the fact that she moved into a role of being able to, to do that, to be ahead of the game. Like these kids are waiting too late in the game to figure out how to take these courses in high school. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And I just want to go to sleep until John turns 21 and wake up and it's all over. Like
that's an 11-year nap. That's an 11-year nap. I want you to enjoy the ride.
I want a 12.
I want you to enjoy.
I want a 12-year nap.
I want you to smell the roses and enjoy the ride. So,
okay.
No, well, but you know what? That's yeah. That story you told though, it is a powerful one. It was the College of William and Mary. Person did an information session there. I thought it was awesome. At the end of the tour, I went back in the office and met with her, and she was like, Mark, I'm thinking about doing what you're doing. I was surprised because I thought she seemed so excited. And she was like, my heart just breaks because I see so many students who we would love to admit, but they took the wrong courses and my hands are tied and there's nothing I can do. I'm thinking if I can get to them earlier, I can help them to make wise curriculum decisions.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, sometimes, Anika, people say to me, when should I start the college process? And I in general, I like people to really start the process between March and June of their sophomore year. But I do believe you want to do a good, solid, at least a single session after 8th and after 9th to make sure kids are taking the right curriculum and they're involved in the right activities. And they just kind of get a basic primer so that they don't, blow out opportunities because they didn't take the right classes. I can tell you right now, Karis would not have gotten Davidson if I made sure that coming into 9th grade, she got into geometry and got out of algebra 1 because I knew she had tested out of that. She got into advanced Spanish and advanced English. And, if she didn't get in there, she would not have been on the right path curriculum wise to have an opportunity to go to a highly selective school like Davidson.
Wow. There it is.
I feel like this stuff is like a burden for you. I want it to be emancipating. No. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power.
It is power, but it's heavy power. I mean, it's straight up heavy power, but it's a realistic power. I mean, it is what it is. We're here now and we got to do it. And that's why we're here. You, me, Mark, because this is what we got to deal with.
So I think the thing that's important to mention is you don't have to go to a highly selective college to have a great life. You don't.
Hello.
So that's the other part that people have to keep in mind. That's the balance.
Yeah. And then you start your college process in 5th grade, like I'm doing with poor little John.
Don't do that. Please don't do that to poor Johnny.
John. He hears me right now. He's like cringing. It's going to be fun though. Isn't it right, okay. John? He's like nodding yes.
No, he's thinking my mom is crazy.
That too, of course.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Mark, our question is from Miss Andy in Philadelphia, Philly. One of my favorite little ladies in Philly is in Philly right now. Mm-hmm. But she wants to know if her daughter moved. Oh, and let me just preface with this, because there are 2 young children that I can think of right now that's scrambling around trying to get this in-state tuition. And I hope, I know I'm going to force them. This is how I know, because I'm going to force them to listen to this. But Andy wants to know if her daughter moves in with relatives in California, could she get in-state tuition so she can attend UCLA and pay the in-state tuition rate? Please answer Andy and these 2 other children that I'm dealing with right now.
Oh, I'm not surprised about those 2 other children, because every year I get probably, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 people that they're like, I can go move in with Uncle Rufus and Aunt Jemima. And I'm looking at this in-state tuition versus out-of-state, and I can save $100,000 over 4 years. Mm-hmm, and so I see the wheels turning, right?
Talk to him, Mark. Talk to him.
Yeah. And I have to say to them, listen, pump the brakes. Schools are smart. They would lose multi-millions of dollars if they made it that easy. So here's what you need to know. Every state is going to have a different policy in terms of how you get in-state tuition. Okay, you can go to your state's educational agency and find that out, or you can just Google it. But it's going to vary from state to state. Not only does it vary from state to state, let's answer this specific question that came in from the mom in Philly about going to UCLA. So California actually has 3 different systems. They have their community college system, they have the California State University system, and then they have the UC system, or the University of California system. Okay, all 3 have different criteria for determining, how you qualify for in-state status. So even within a state, you can have different systems. But because she asked about UCLA, I'm going to give the answer for the UC system. Keep in mind that the UC system is the most selective of the 3 systems in California. So it is not as easy as you think. So in general, to be classified as a California resident for tuition purposes, the adult student must establish a primary and a permanent domicile in California for at least 366, that's 1 year plus 1, right? More than a year, days, and listen, and not or, and they have to relinquish all ties to all past places of residence. So this is tricky, because even the parent of the dependent student, they have to claim California residence. So you can't just ship off little Johnny out to live with Uncle Rufus. Okay, the parent has to claim California residence. They have to fulfill physical presence and intent requirements. So that is difficult. And a student with out-of-state parents also has to prove financial independence. So what does all this mean? Break it down. Physical presence. What are we talking about? Well, physical presence is not as easy to achieve as you think. In California, for educational purposes, of course, like I said, you have to have these 366 days here in the state before what's known as the residence determination date, which is established in writing in advance, which is generally the start of the school term. Okay. Now, intent is very important because there has to be the intention to make California your permanent home. So they can sniff out if you're just going out there and you're still a dependent student and your parent is still in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Okay. They're going to snuff it out because your parent didn't move. You didn't relinquish your former residence. The intent has to be to stay beyond just education. Intent is evaluated by separation from your physical presence, and it requires objective evidence. Objective evidence. So what do you think some of these indices that they would use would be, Anika, to determine objective evidence?
I would think that you've worked there, like you have to establish that you're working, like you're taking care of yourself. And I guess you have to release that you're a dependent of your parent. Like I'm on my own now. Like I'm not being claimed on their taxes. I'm off on my own and I'm doing my thing. I'm trying to make it happen. And I've been working X amount of months or years, whatever, in this state. I mean, that's my best guess as to how you say I'm all up in it.
So here are some of the ways. State of California resident tax returns. Can you show state tax returns?
Yep.
Secondly, how about a California driver's license or a state ID? Do you have that? And can you show that? Are you maintaining your vehicle registration in California? Have you registered to vote in California? Have you registered for the Select Service if in California you hadn't already previously done that? So these are the kinds of things that they are looking for as evidence, establishing eligibility for receiving state of California public benefits. These are some of the main ones. And so if you don't have those, it's not going to happen. Now, remember, we said the parent had to go out there. So what if the parent doesn't go out there with you? Okay. Then there's another thing they look for, and it's called financial independence. Financial independence. And so for financial independence, a student who is not dependent on a California resident parent must demonstrate financial independence for 2 full years. 2 full years preceding the residential determination date. Okay, so the bottom line is, and they are going to look for things like W-2s, 1099s, all of that, housing rental contracts, lease information, okay, bank statements. I mean, there's a lot. And so it's just, as you can see, it's really just not as simple as Uncle Rufus and Mama, can I like crash on your like couch? For like 6 months.
But let me ask you this, Mark. So should Uncle Rufus like write out a contract and say that I'm leasing from him? Like I'm not trying to like insinuate.
No. I mean, remember, you have to establish your independence from your biological parents. So once again, if the parents don't come out with you and are there for more than a year and relinquish their past, they can't just the relinquish the past is important because so you can't have a wealthy parent just take out rent, okay, in California. That's still not going to cut it for in-state tuition because you haven't relinquished your former address.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you can't just that's another thing. Oh, I'll just get an apartment and I'll rent it and you can no, because you're still a dependent student. So they're going to go back and look at as a dependent student, where is the parent's residence and the parent's job and the parent filing taxes. And if and the only way to get around that is to have 2 full years of independence to, in the state with providing all that documentation. So I'm not trying to bust any bubbles. But I'm just saying,
please bust them, especially these 2 children I'm talking to right now. Bust them up.
You're harsh tonight.
You're harsh. I'm just saying.
They're just trying to make it happen. They're just trying to be a little entrepreneurial here and creative.
I'm just saying that it is not. Nothing is that easy. And they're taking it as that easy, and it's not. But to your point, Mark, earlier about it being different from state to state. So what agency is that owns that process? Is that like a residency agency for each state? Like, how do we know who to go to even figure out what the rules are?
Yeah. So once again, every state has a state higher ed agency. And there will be a document that will be, you can read the document that will describe their policy that has been established. And you can also just Google, like in-state tuition, getting in-state tuition in Wisconsin, and you should pull up that way as well. if you don't want to go through the state education agency. But it really is important that you check the policies because I once worked with a student, Anika, that went to boarding school in a state. Normally, if you go to boarding school in a state, you still are dependent on your parents that live in the state the parents came from. And so you can't just go to the college in that state and think you could get in-state tuition. But I worked with a student that was able to get that. The state said, no, you were in boarding school here. So they actually allowed it. Most states would not allow that.
I know of one too. Yeah. I know one too.
Yeah. So the point is, the bottom line is check out the policy for your state. But the second thing that I would say, though, is it is generally not as easy as people think. Yeah, because as long as you're dependent on that parent, they're going to go by the residence of where that parent lives. Any questions?
Get you some scholars. Nope.
I mean, this is their money. I mean, look at it this way, Anika. Why is it that in-state? Let me ask you this: why does an in-state resident pay less to go to school at their in their in-state institution? Why?
Actually, you know what? That's a question I should have asked you before you got it to me, because that is a question. It's like a student is a student, a room is a room. You know, they're in there the same way the other person is in there, and I totally actually don't get that. Like, why is it that the cost?
Yeah,
is so
the reason is because ever since you've been working as an adult, you have been paying state taxes. And what are part of your state taxes doing? They are going to fund your state institution. Okay. So you're a 45-year-old parent. You started working at 18. You've put 27 years in to paying into that state institution. Now it's time for you to get that. Now it's time for you to get the benefit by getting a tax break.
That makes sense.
Versus somebody trying to freeload off of that, come crashing in on the party, hasn't paid any state taxes, and wants to pay the same price you pay.
My tax dollars going to work. That's what I like. You're right. I should have thought of that. Exactly.
Yeah, that's it. Awesome. All good. It's all good.
Awesome.
Friends, I hope you stay tuned and listen to my interview with Jake Neuberg. It's one of my favorite interviews that I've done. He's going to dispel a lot of the myths about online test prep. Energizing, electrifying, charismatic guy. Keeps it real and has a lot of just general wisdom for all of us. So listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we are very fortunate today to have the CEO and co-founder of a very innovative test prep company with us today. Jake Neuberg is our guest today. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Jake.
Thanks, Mark. It's so great to be here.
So, Jake, tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe, where you grew up, a bit about your education and how you got interested in test prep.
Yeah, it's funny because how I got interested in test prep really started when I was in high school. I still remember the very first time I took the PSAT, and I thought I did great, and it was absolutely one of those situations where I didn't know what I didn't know. I scored below the national average, which that's not great. And I was a really good student. I tried really hard, but I got a little bit of help. I worked really hard, and my scores went up, and they went up dramatically. And by the time I was done with high school, I was in the 99th percentile.
Wow, what a difference.
Massive difference. And it really opened up not only opportunities for me in terms of where I was going to go to school and that kind of thing, but also it really just changed my perspective on life of, you know what? You're going to see really, really hard things in life. You're going to see things where you don't do well the first time, but you get people on your team who believe in you and are really good, and you work really, really hard, and you'll surprise yourself with what you're able to achieve. And so that stayed with me, for the 27 years or so or 28 years since I took that PSAT.
So was that one-on-one test prep you were getting with someone that was so instrumental for you at that time, or group, or what were you doing?
It wasn't really. I grew up in a town of 6,000 people, and it was also a different time, right, in the early 90s. And so my dad helped me out. He got me a bunch of books. Fortunately, it was a town of 6,000 people, so there wasn't that much to do. And I was really able to spend a bunch of time on it. But had I had someone working with me one-on-one, it would have been so much more efficient. I remember still, I learned 1,000 vocabulary words for the SAT, 0 of which showed up on the SAT. But all of which I use all the time,
So walk us through from there to sort of starting your company.
Sure. Well, it's funny because where I grew up, about sophomore year, I became a ski racer, which is a little unique because I lived 4 hours away from the mountain. And there was these two guys who were doing it and they were seniors and I hitched a ride with them. And that became a really big part of my life, sophomore year, junior year, so much so that I ended up graduating a year early from high school and going to college a year early so that I could focus on ski racing. And only schools I applied to that freshman year were all big ski schools. University of Utah, Vermont, New Hampshire, Colorado, and I ended up going to Utah. And it was amazing, but one thing I realized is, wow, these guys, Utah was the national champion. These guys had been in the Olympics before, and it was like, I thought I was a good ski racer, and I was good, but at that level, these guys were just that world-class level. And I had a choice to make of, am I going to continue down this path? And there was a kid who had been on my team the year before who was the best guy probably in California. He was 2 years older than me. And he was 3 years out from even making the University of Utah ski team. And I was like, man, I'm years behind him.
Wow.
I think it's time to focus on my academics. I did a study abroad in Central America for 6 months, which was amazing. And then I ended up at Berkeley. And that's where I ended up graduating, was from UC Berkeley.
I see. So you transferred over to Berkeley, graduated, and still walk us through there to let me start a test prep company, because I feel like we're missing chapter 2 in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I graduated, and this was in 1997, and I had done an internship in investment banking because I actually had met some folks who were living in Guatemala when I was there studying Spanish, and they made investment banking and finance sound really exciting. And I went and did investment banking, and there everyone wanted to do private equity. So I came over and did private equity right when I graduated college, and it just wasn't a fit. I remember distinctly sitting across the table from a ton of people because we were doing this big deal, and just really seeing, wait a minute, I'm much more like this entrepreneur than I am like these bankers or lawyers or private equity folks. I think I want to start a company of some kind, but I had no idea what. So I quit my job less than a year into it, and I just went for an adventure. And I'd really had a great time when I was in Central America. And so I basically packed up a backpack and I spent the entire summer hitchhiking around all the national parks in the Western US and Canada, all the way from California up to Alaska, down into Montana, and everywhere in between.
That sounds fun. That sounds fun.
It was amazing. It was amazing. And it was the kind of thing that you can only do when you're 22 years old, right? Now I got 4 kids. I've got so much going on. But when you're 22 years old, and hey, you could make an argument it's not the smartest thing to do, hitchhiking. I'd never hitchhiked before.
Right.
And I was like, I'm going to hitchhike to Alaska. But it was this fun, exciting experience. And I probably read 2 or 3 books a week. And I just got I feel that something I do too much is I think about what's next. And I had been working so hard while I was in college and getting internships and getting a job and just, working so hard that I didn't take a time to take a step back and think, what's really interesting? What's going to make me happy? And on that trip, I realized, I like doing things that are entrepreneurial. I like things around kind of entertainment and storytelling. And I like things about working with students and education. And I moved back to LA after that trip, and I got a job at Kaplan because I had so much faith in the idea that students can increase their abilities in these areas. And so I started teaching everything, SAT, ACT, GMAT, GRE, LSAT, and I loved it. But I had a bunch of students say, look, these Kaplan strategies aren't that helpful to me. Is this what you use when you take the test? And I said, well, actually, no, I do it this way. And they said, oh my God, that's so much better. Great, I'm going to do it that way. Well, unbeknownst to me, they were going around telling all their friends, hey, if you take this Kaplan class, make sure you get Jake as your instructor. He does it differently. I didn't think anything of it. Apparently, the Kaplan folks pulled me aside and told me this story. And I thought they were going to say, hey, we'd love to learn from some of these strategies. And I would have been happy to share it with them. But instead, they said, hey, we've been around since 1938. I think we know what we're doing. If you think you can do it better, why don't you go start your own company?
Wow. That
Yeah.
ended up being a blessing.
Yeah, it really was. It really was a blessing. And I remember telling this to my students more as like, isn't that silly? And my students, my high school students were like, you should totally do it. We'll come be interns for free. We'll refer students to you. I remember thinking, wait a minute, maybe this is 1998 where everything had to be a .com kind of thing. And I remember thinking, you know what? Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the kind of thing that I'm really passionate about education and that kind of thing. So I ended up going to business school at UCLA. And that's where I met my co-founder, who had kind of had a similar experience. He was an engineering major. His name's Ramit Varma in college, but he had paid his way through college as a teacher at the Princeton Review. And he went back to business school thinking he was going to do something and, the kind of things that you do out of business school, investment banking or consulting. And he had a similar experience. I want to do something really entrepreneurial. I want to start something. And I'm really passionate about education. And we started talking and talked all through business school about what would it look like. And we never knew, are we going to really do this? I have kind of a big personality and I'm typically a leader of a group, and he is too. And so it's like, all right, are we going to be the good fit? But when we graduated, we sat down and we just said, you know what? Let's do this. 50-50 handshake deal. We're partners.
Nice.
And that's how we've been for 16 years.
So what do you feel are some of the distinctive differences between, you and some of the other test prep companies out there? And I know you have to love it every time someone's looking at you or Kaplan and you win that one. That has to be rewarding.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is. And it's funny. And I don't hold ill will in a lot of ways. I have real appreciation for, and they were really nice about it. They were really nice about it. Even when I did go and start my own company, they were really nice about it. So I think there's a couple of things that were really different and have been different since the beginning. And then there's a couple of things that we've really kind of extended those differences in the past 5 years or so. But from day one, we were looking around, and so much of the research says that the number one correlation between someone's SAT score and any other metric is their parents' income.
Yep.
Now, there's a lot of things that go into that, right? Their parents are more educated and that's why they make more money, and thus the kids are going to be more educated. But we said, you know what? Let's make it so that if a student can't afford our program, we make it so that they can afford it. And so day one, we had a social mission. No one was turned away due to their inability to pay for our program. And day one, we didn't know, okay, are people going to take advantage of this? Is this going to last? But 16 years later, thousands of kids have received either full scholarships or major scholarships for our program. So that's a big difference. Another big difference is we exclusively work with schools. That's how almost all of our students find out about us, is we work with schools. And by doing it, there's so much we can do for the school to help the school. We share data. It also gives the students such protection, because if they're not having an amazing experience, they can go to their school and their school will advocate for them. And we know this. We've been working with some of the most selective and prestigious schools for more than a decade. And so they are that return customer. They're the ones that know, look, Revolution is different from any other test prep company. So I think that's a second one, is that we work really closely with schools. And there's two more. The third is that we really are different from every other test prep company I've seen, and that they focus so much on tricks and how to avoid the traps, and it's really test prep. And for us, it really is about building these fundamental skills. How do you get better at math? How do you get better at reading comprehension? How do you get better at attention to detail and the kind of analytical problem solving that is going to help you not just on this one test, but every other test and so much other work that you're going to do for the rest of your lives? Sure, we familiarize them with all the different tests, but if you can get good at those, all the hard work that you put in isn't just going to help you on this one test, it's going to help you for the rest of your life. And the last one is really around the change that we made to online. And I know we can talk about that a little bit later, but that's the other big difference, is how we're online.
So first of all, I absolutely love the social mission. One thing about our podcast, we have a kind of a unique sensitivity to access and equity and creating more opportunities for everyone. And so I love that passion there. Love your story. I reached out to one of my students and said, you might want to take a look at Revolution Prep. And they were they're like, we're already using you at our school. They said Deerfield Academy. You must have the account.
Oh,
Must
yeah.
have the Deerfield Academy. I do a lot of boarding school placements. I got a lot of boarding school kids, and I realized you got a lot of those contracts up there in the Northeast. Good for you.
Yeah, we work with a lot of boarding school kids. The online really helps because these kids tend to move around a lot. Or not move around a lot, but just they're at school, then they're at home, that kind of thing. And so it ends up being really, really great for kids in boarding school.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, if you want to learn more about endowments and how they work, then you want to go to a website we referenced earlier in this podcast. And that website is nacubo.org. That's NACUBO.org. This is an acronym for the National Association of Colleges and Universities Business Officers. It's a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1962. It serves over 2,000 colleges and universities that serve as members. NACUBO has sponsored an annual study on endowments every year since 1974. If you want to learn about what a college endowment is, how college endowments work, which colleges have the largest and smallest endowments, after you go to nacubo.org, go to the Topics tab, and then click the Endowment Management tab. And presto, you'll see very helpful information, including an excellent video, as well as other information. There's also some great free information at nacubo.org, but some of their best information does require you to purchase the reports. An example of this is their detailed tuition discount study, which you can find under the Research tab. We will now return to my interview with Jake Neuberg of Revolution Prep. So let's talk about that online, because my understanding is initially you were not. You were face-to-face, both group, one-on-one, come into the school, teach classes in the school, do some one-on-one, and the company wasn't founded as an online focus, and that's been more of a recent development. Talk to us about why you made the change and what you see as the advantages to going online.
Yeah. So absolutely. When we started the company, it was 2002, and we thought about, God, can we do this online? How would we do it online? But the world wasn't ready for it then, right? Like broadband adoption wasn't there. And so we had classes on high school campuses. The tutoring was in students' homes. And about 2012, we had a class on nearly 1,000 high school campuses. And we had tutors going into students' homes, thousands more homes. We had 1,500 tutors who were working an average of just under 3 hours a week. Now take a step back and think about that for a second. You have a job that's a 3-hour-a-week job. How committed could you possibly be, and how much training could you possibly have? And yet, that was every tutoring company we saw. That was Kaplan. That was Princeton Review. That was all the little guys. That was us. And it was just not working. Logistically, it was challenging. We had these tutors that weren't committed. And yet we had about 3 or 4 tutors who were working with our international students. And because they were working with international students, by necessity, they were doing some of it online. Well, those tutors were full-time employees because they were working with students throughout Latin America and the Middle East and in Asia and in all 4 or 5 time zones in the US. So the only way you can do tutoring full-time is if you work with kids in a bunch of different time zones. And the only way to do that is either have a really fast private jet or to fly around, or more realistically, you do it online. And when we looked at it, score improvements were significantly higher with those tutors, isn't twice as high. Customer satisfaction was higher. The kinds of things that we started the company being inspired by, of let's not just help kids get better scores, but let's help them really change their lives. All that was so much more dramatic with these online. And when we really looked at it and we did a lot of the research and saw, okay, broadly, what does the academic research say drives outcomes? Online versus offline didn't seem to have a big difference so long as it was face-to-face and it was interactive. There's some benefits of online, which is you can see a student's face and their work at the same time. So you can do those nonverbal checks for understanding while at the same time looking at their work. There's benefits that way. It's easier to schedule when it's online, so they're going to be more likely to actually do the tutoring and not miss a session here and there. There are benefits to it being in person, right? The person's just sitting right there. You can make an argument. It's a little easier to build that relationship. But the big thing that just dwarfs everything else is because online in and of itself isn't going to really change things. What changes things is if you make your tutors full-time employees. And that's what we did. So we changed two things at once. We brought them from offline to online, and now all of our tutors are full-time employees. So they get 100 hours or so of training up front. They get 3 hours every week of professional development. So remember, a typical tutoring company, they get 3 hours of work experience. Our tutors get 3 hours of professional development and training, and they get 30 or more hours of work experience. So they just move up that expertise curve so much faster. And so if I were to look at one of our competitors and look at their typical tutor, which maybe has 100 or 200 hours of experience for an experienced tutor, compared to one of our experienced tutor who has 5,000 or 6,000 hours of experience, how could you compete with someone who has 30 times as much training and experience as you? So that's where it is absolutely game changing, where it is absolutely unfair comparison between us and any other competitor. Yet still, our number one challenge when we talk to parents is, oh boy, I don't know. I think my kid needs someone sitting next to them and that kind of thing. And that's why we say, look, I get it. You haven't had this experience yet. Try it out. And if after 6 hours of tutoring, you don't agree, this is the best tutor you've ever had, you call us and we'll give you a full refund. And to tell you the truth, we need to be better at really encouraging families to take us up on it, because fewer than 1% of people ever ask for a refund because the online experience. What we hear back is, oh my God, that was even better than I could have possibly imagined. These tutors are just amazing. And we say, yeah, I mean, we only hire 2% of the applicants, then we put them through tons of training. It's game changing. It's really cool.
That's awesome.
It's really cool.
And I can relate to a lot of what you're sharing, because I do individual private coaching for the college process, and I have clients all around the country. And for my Atlanta clients, I'll offer them on the option of doing video conferencing or coming in person. And I do get some occasionally that say, it's just not the same, not being there. So occasionally I do get some that just want that face-to-face. But then I also get people that are like literally 15 minutes away.
Yeah.
And they'd rather do it online. So I think another huge advantage is just the practicality for the family of not having to fight traffic and manage the logistics of getting to the tutor.
It really is. I mean, it's so easy. Instead of, we've heard parents say things that, like, even when it was the tutor was coming to them, well, maybe the tutor gets stuck in traffic. Or we heard parents say, oh, I had this person come into my house and then I felt I had to feed them and I felt that my house had to be clean. And now I don't have to worry about that. The other thing is, from a quality control standpoint, we record all these tutoring sessions. And so from both a safety and a quality control, we can make sure, okay, kids are having amazing experience. Tutors are doing the stuff they're supposed to be doing. And we send a parent update every week to the parents. So what parents tell us is, I'm more in the loop now with this tutor who's working with my kid who lives across the country than I was with the tutor who would come into my kitchen and sit at the dining room table with my kid every week. I'm more in the loop on what's going on now. So it's not just online makes things different or better. It gives you a lot of opportunities. And then if you're really hardworking and smart and focused on what's going to improve the student experience, because a lot of people just assumed, oh, you guys just went online to save money. And it actually not. Like, this is more expensive because the tutors, their rate stayed exactly the same from when we were offline. So they get paid exactly the same, but it's way better for them because they're not driving around. So they're actually getting paid for every hour. But now we give them healthcare and we give them more training. So it's not necessarily cheaper, but the quality is so much better. And the turnover of our tutors is so much lower that it really is night and day, the business we're running.
And all those things, benefits and, lack of what they call windshield time, that also enables you to recruit, probably somebody that you may not be able to recruit with some of those extra benefits, which just increases the caliber of your tutors.
You're exactly
I can tell you, Jake, a couple of things that really stood out to me, because you guys were talking to me for almost a year. One of your representatives, Odette Fleming,
Yeah.
I used to work with her before, both at a competitor company and then independently. And she reached out to me for about a year. We had a lot of correspondence. Of course, I met you guys down in New Orleans at SACAC, had a great interaction with you there. But definitely when I found out that you hire less than 2% of your tutors, that was like a wow. And then your money back guarantee and the full time, those three things really did resonate me. Just
Interesting.
And so, and I have to say, like, several of my students are using you now, and I'm very, very pleased with the feedback I'm getting from them as well.
Excellent.
Very pleased.
That's great. Yeah. Odette is such a smart lady and such a superstar. I'm excited that we're starting to get more Atlanta schools that we're working with so that we can, have more students for her. I mean, it's so clear that she cares about her students and is such a great advocate for her students, making sure they're on the right path. But yeah, it's really powerful being able to do that training. It's funny you talk about the 2%, and we joke a little bit that we're more selective than Harvard or Stanford or some of these crazy schools. It's true. But we talk about man,
but it's true.
It's really inefficient to hire only 1 out of 50 people that you interview. And so one of the things that we were looking at is okay, are there ways that there's got to be one more out of that 50 that would make an amazing tutor. But we're all right, where are we okay, quote unquote, lowering the standard? They have to love these kids and care about the kids and have that empathy and sympathy for their kids. They have to have that commitment. And so one of the areas that we're taking a look at is, can we bring in people who don't have amazing SAT scores day one? Can we give them tutoring and training? Because what we've seen is people that come in with a perfect SAT score out of the gate almost always are not good tutors because they lack empathy. They're just oh, this is easy for me. And it's well, it's not easy for this kid, obviously. Otherwise, they wouldn't be getting tutoring. The best tutor is the tutor that starts at a 1,200 and gets to a 1,500. Because then when they're working with a student who are oh, I can't increase my scores, they can say, you know where I was a year ago? I had a lower score than you. And now I'm at a 1,500. So it's something that we're looking at right now. All right, can we get some of these applicants that have lower scores, can we get them up to that 95th percentile and above, and they will be believers. So we'll see. We'll let you know, because that's our goal. That's our goal. Yeah. Please do.
I love it. That's great. I'll follow up with you on that. Friends, in part 2 of my interview with Jake Neuberg, Jake shares what Revolution Prep does for students who really struggle with organization. Jake describes the Revolution Math program. Jake shares Revolution Prep's unique homework help program. Next, Jake describes how they work with kids who don't like math. Jake gives his advice to young kids who want to improve their scores. Jake surprised me by saying that families come for test prep, but they leave with something even more important than test scores. Jake shares 2 amazing stories of kids who drastically improved their test scores. Anika and I think you really will enjoy the final part of my interview, Jake Neuberg.
Next week in the news, we are going to be digging deeper into student debt and default rates. And we'll be in chapter 37 of 171 answers. And we're talking about what is the PSAT and why is it so important? And Lord Mark Nea is taking this thing on October 10th. Oh, this is so timely. And next week's question is from a mom who wants to know if a student with an impressive leadership project in process, if they should wait to apply in the early action round to their top choice, very selective school before the award is received, or should they wait until the award is actually received before they apply to that school? And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send it to someone you know who could really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. Marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And Your College Bound Kid is produced by Esteban Sartho. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you would like to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text at area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on each show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.